Hello everybody, I'm Kate Cast, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About. Today, let's talk about The Owl House. This is a show that has long been waiting to get its turn here on Let's Talk About. It's been mentioned briefly in some of my other videos here and there, so it wasn't a question of if I was going to cover this show, but when. Well, now. The answer's now. There was a good amount of hype for this show as it was being reported on and promoted in the year or two leading up to its release. Whenever it was mentioned, I always remember seeing people really excited for it. Though what I found the most fascinating about the show is that the creator was none other than Dana Terrace. Terrace made a name for herself being a storyboard artist and occasional animator on Gravity Falls, sometimes for the show's most amazing and well-remembered moments, then was a director for the first season of the DuckTales reboot, until eventually moving on to create her own series. I've become a huge fan of Dana Terrace ever since her Gravity Falls days, so the idea of seeing an entire show developed by her is what got at my attention. The Owl House is one of those shows with a pretty easy elevator pitch of a plot. The series follows Luz Noceda, an eccentric and optimistic girl who suddenly finds herself whisked away to another dimension of magic and mystery, where she decides to stay over the summer and learn the art of witchcraft from an outlaw witch for a mentor, a gang of fellow student witches, and an adorable demon. Now, as a premise, that's nothing new by any stretch, but the Owl House knows this. It knows that it's a done-to-death premise in the preteen demographic filled with trope-tastic episodic adventures and character archetypes seen time and time again. That's why it takes every opportunity it possibly can to turn those expectations on their head. It's the impression you get right away as our protagonist, Luz, arrives on the Boiling Isles, not whisked away to a prophesized world of magic and wonder that she is predestined to save, but instead falling into the lap of a wanted fugitive with her roommate slash pet demon. Needless to say, her fantastical expectations for this world get shattered very quickly.
This is clearly not the PG fantasy world I always dreamed about.
That said, the Boiling Isles is a creative location, endearing in just how disturbing it is. It has the same unorthodox charm to it that Gravity Falls did sometimes, which extends to its inhabitants, a cesspool of diverse characters that could all live perfectly innocent lives while also wanting to eat your flesh. Some of them feel like they jumped straight out of a Miyazaki movie. I would not be surprised to see creatures like the Bat Queen frequenting the bathhouse and Spirited Away. I really love how well thought out the systems of this world are as we see and learn more about it through Luz's experiences. From small things like using crystal balls and scrolls as magical replacements for computers and tablets, to constants in the story like the covens and the connections between witches and their magic, which are consistently and organically built upon, to details about the world that are smaller right now, or lightly implied to have a larger story behind them, that can make for excellent material to expand on in future seasons. It all lays the groundwork for a rich, well thought out universe to inhabit and speculate about, with a history and culture behind it, embracing the adventure the show is setting out on, indulging in the world's eccentricities, and possibly letting your own imagination run away with you in the details the show serves up. I'm sure this is going to be a show ripe with varied fan content. Speaking of fans, the Owl House also has a fair amount of jabs at fandom and nerd culture, with jokes about shipping and fan fiction and hyperfixating on media to the point that it shapes your worldview, with references to niche interests in pop culture littering conversation and background props, from anime to fantasy to teen romance and more. Shows have poked fun at this area of their audience that most of them know is there, but the Owl House is probably the first time I've seen terms like those used so casually and naturally, while also being really funny.
I can't wait for the sequel.
If it's disappointing in any way, I will spend every day of my life trashing it.
Sometimes people can see humor connected to poking fun at fan culture as insensitive, whether warranted or not, but so far, I think the Owl House is handling it with grace and accuracy.
You're not coming from a place of intellectual honesty, so debating you would be pointless.
This is an aspect of the show that I could easily see becoming mimetic, and I'm frankly shocked I don't see quotes from it frequently pop up on my social media. I think it's only a matter of time, maybe once the show gains more momentum. There's also a lot of jokes at Harry Potter's expense. Like a lot.
But we haven't even taken the quiz to determine our coven type.
That's just one example. There's way more that, fan of the Wizarding World or not, are pretty hilarious. Personally, I don't have a horse in that race, so take those comments for what they are. The humor as a whole is pretty witty, emphasized with great delivery from the voice actors, with the most common joke being related to culture clash. How the Boiling Isles is very similar to our world, except for the magic and the fact that everything is deadly. Everything. One of my favorite running gags is misinterpreting the purposes of human items Ida brings back to sell to the magical masses. The clever writing manages to keep making a joke that could have gotten old quick laugh out loud funny. Then again, one of my all-time favorite shows is basically 6 seasons of that same joke, so maybe it's just playing to my preferences. Either way, it's still well written in the humor department. In true magical world fashion, the magical conflicts can act as physical obstacles for whatever the characters are going through, overpowering them while overcoming their own internal conflicts. From shrinking, to body swapping, to dream walking, to other mischievous activities, you get the idea. Like I said, this is a trope-tastic show, but it utilizes the tried and true tools in its kit to build something strong and memorable. The best showcase of that innovation being the characters. Let's go a bit more in depth there, starting with our leading witch in training, Luz Noceda. Now, while the show has a very well-rounded cast of characters, Luz is the heart and soul of the series. She's introduced to us as a very lonely kid, a young girl who doesn't have any real friends, has unusual interests that get her in trouble at school, and spends most of her time making AMVs on the internet, and this is hitting a little too close to home. But when she stumbles onto the Boiling Isles, she finds her people, in a sense. People who are not only weird and mystical, but most of the time are also outcasts in their society for one reason or another. In the first episode, Luz runs into people who are literally sent to jail for having weird interests and preferences. While Luz is different and eccentric, she never apologizes for being herself. She's confident in who she is, and because of that, her outgoing nature encourages others to be themselves and express their potential, which most of the time is positively received in a world that, chaotic as it is, can be just as rigid and demanding of conformity as ours. Luz forms connections to Ida and King pretty much right away, which is part of the reason why she decides to stay. She doesn't want to leave the only somewhat accepting environment she's ever known, and wants to achieve her very outlandish dream of becoming a witch no matter what it takes. But as you might expect, Luz's training to become a witch doesn't go exactly as she thought. Now, Luz isn't a slacker or anything, she's very determined and enthusiastic, but she does experience something of a reality check once life on the Boiling Isles reveals itself to be much more complicated than the magical world conceived of in the book she reads. Luz may be weird and outgoing, but she's not special. At least not in the way she wants to be. She doesn't have a clear path laid out to her to achieve a great magical feat and prove that she's worth something. Over the course of the series, whatever achievements she has, she works for. Having to work around her limitations in this place as a human and find her own way to cast spells. And as much as I have a soft spot for destined children and fantasy stories, this is a very refreshing change of pace. Let's go a bit more into the rest of the cast who will help Luz on her journey, like her renegade teacher, Ida Clawthorne, a con woman and wanted fugitive for practicing magic in unorthodox ways by not joining a coven, therefore being able to learn a much wider variety of magic. As you can guess, Ida is presented to us as a very self-serving rogue, who will take shortcuts and scam any chump within a 10-mile radius to make a solid buck. Back to the Gravity Falls comparisons, people have pointed out the similarities between her attitude and Grunkle Stan's, and it's pretty hilarious how people's imaginations have just run with that. However, much like that grouchy Grunkle, we see Ida's more compassionate side when it comes to the kid that she now has to look after for a summer. I find it very strange and sweet just how quickly Ida becomes fond of Luz. Sure, she teases her and puts her down a lot, but more often than not, she goes the extra mile for this kid and offers genuine support and wisdom. Even doing things like making up for the trouble she caused in her magic school if it'll help get Luz enrolled, or risking being recognized in public events if Luz really wants to attend them just so she can look out for her. It feels like Ida starts to consider Luz family in a very short amount of time. She even starts calling Luz her kid, which is just so darn sweet. That swift affection could be because of the complicated relationship she has with her own family. Early on in the series, we meet Ida's sister, Lilith, a member of the most prestigious coven on the island, the Emperor's Coven, whose main job job during this first season is arresting her sister. Those hunts usually just dissolved into petty sibling rivalries though. Whenever Lilith shows up, it seems to shine more of a light on Ida because of just how different they are. A detail I like that highlights this is how Ida will sometimes shorten Lilith's name to a nickname, but Lilith will always address Ida by her full name. One being looser and more casual, the other being as proper as possible. But the encounters they have over season 1 reveal that when they were younger, they had similar aspirations, but due to circumstances that come up much later, they went down very different paths. It gives us much more insight into Ida as time goes on. Her past and the circumstances that stem from those choices play a big part in the story of the first season, and it's one of the most compelling things about the series so far. I also want to point out that Ida is voiced by character actor Wendy Malick, who I absolutely love. She's no stranger to voice acting. You might recognize a couple of her recurring roles, but this is the first time I've heard her voice a main character, and they couldn't have picked someone better. She fits Ida perfectly. But one of the most entertaining characters is the King of Demons, or King for short. King is the possibly self-proclaimed King of Demons, a loudmouth, power-hungry ball of fur who tries his hardest to be intimidating and monstrous, a perception that is quickly overcome by just how cute he is. King was always something that drew my eye to the show as it was being promoted, not just because he looks like a Pokemon, but he has such an appealing design. It tries to be dark and edgy, but is really just adorable. It's the perfect character design to appeal to the Nightmare Before Christmas generation. He's not threatening in the slightest, like not even a little, but tries at every opportunity to assert dominance, even if it's just over a playground or a legion of stuffed animals he recruits for his armies. Aww, isn't that precious?
I am not your cutie pie!
Yes, you are.
You can see what I mean. It's tough for King to not be intimidating or powerful in any way, which is why he constantly craves attention, lets the slightest bit of power go to his head, and is not above manipulating others on the road to gaining that power, all to marvelous comedic effect. King is one of those characters who could skirt very close to the unforgivable jerk territory that happens to comedic sidekicks sometimes, but thankfully they've kept King away from that fate so far. He does bad things, but he either gets his comeuppance or feels bad about them and tries his best to make up for those mistakes. Much like Ida, King quickly becomes very fond of Luce, getting invested in her interests, joking around together, and having someone around who understands what it's like not to be taken seriously. Luce gives King what he's always wanted, genuine affection and attention, and it gets really cute sometimes. King is the character I really want to know more about in future seasons. Is he actually the King of Demons, or did he make that up? Where does he come from? Are there other demons like him? How did he wind up living with Ida? I have so many questions about King that I hope are answered someday. Going back to voice acting, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that King is voiced by none other than Gravity Falls creator and, like, half of its voice cast, Alex Hirsch, basically doing his Bill Cipher voice without the added effect or intimidating tone.
The demon at my shoulder makes a good point.
Always trust a shoulder demon!
As Liz travels outside the Owl House to learn more about magic, she visits and later enrolls in the Owl's magic school, Hexside, making many magical friends, the first being Willow and Gus. Willow is a quiet yet kind kid who doesn't seem to have any friends until Luz comes along. She's insecure about her own magical abilities because she's a late bloomer, which gives her a rough time at school. But once she discovers what she's really good at and believes in her own abilities, she can accomplish amazing feats, primarily in plant magic. Willow's a pretty good example of the idea that just because you don't get somewhere as quickly as everyone else does, doesn't mean you can't achieve great things. You might even be better at them once you get there. With Willow, most of her obstacles in this season come from her trying to maintain her newfound confidence in the face of past and present incidents that can make her feel like she's worthless. But with Luz, she has someone who holds her up and is always ready to tell her just how amazing she is. It's a fine example of how even just one person being there for you can make all the difference. Augustus, or Gus as Luz calls him, is a fanatic eagerly studying the life of humans, but like many on the Boiling Isles, he misinterprets a lot of the glimpses he gets into the human world. He's a bright, enthusiastic kid with a lot of showmanship. He's also the youngest of the group since he moved up a couple of grades. Gus doesn't have many insecurities, but the ones he does come from the fact that he is younger than his classmates, so he likely has a lot of trouble fitting in. We see that front and center in the episode where Gus Gus tries to keep his position as president of the Human Appreciation Society. Now, I was homeschooled for a good amount of my time in the world of education, so I don't claim to be an expert, but I'm pretty sure the head of after-school clubs don't have makeshift crowns. But instead of doing whatever it takes to hold on to that title, he takes responsibility for his questionable actions over the episode to protect his one true friend who likes him no matter what. Luce. Gus has mostly been around for support and comedy outside of that episode, but there is definitely room to expand on his character in the future. And finally, the student I'm sure most of you have been waiting for me to mention, Amity Blight. Amity is introduced as the mean girl at Hexside, someone who's defined by being the exceptional top student with her own clique of yes girls and knocks down anyone who comes close to overshadowing her. An overachiever who has to be the best. This is an attitude that persists for about 2 episodes. Maybe 3. Amity embodies a couple things regarding character development and insight that we've already talked about. The way she is being more understandable as we learn more about her, and reassessing herself a lot as she spends time with Luce. In the beginning, she hates Luce. Amity takes studying magic very seriously, and at first, she feels like Luce's eccentric interference devalues her own hard work. That this human is not taking the craft she's dedicating her life to seriously. But Luce shows her how much she really admires witchcraft and how hard she's working to learn it her own way. As time goes on, Luce and Amity discover that they have quite a bit in common, and while Amity is more than willing to call Luce out when she does something reckless with magic, she also starts to admire how unashamed Luce is to be herself and how accepting she is. Finding Luce's quirks and courage, charming in a sense. Unlike the environment Amity grew up in, where status and perfectionism were the only acceptable goals in life. Realizing Amity is under that kind of pressure to succeed explains a lot about her. One of the best episodes of the series right now is Understanding Willow, where it's revealed that Amity used to be friends with Willow when they were kids, but because she wasn't good enough at magic then, her parents forced her to stop being her friend. A falling out which led to Willow becoming very insecure about her skills as a witch. Now, credit where it's due, Amity did fight back against this about as much as she could have for a 7-year-old, but in the end, she was a little kid, intimidated into obeying her parents' desires that were not in her best interest, but theirs. Like so many others around her, thanks to Luce's friendship and acceptance, Amity gains the courage to build bridges, mend friendships the best she can, and be sure of herself without the need for others' approval. What's that? I'm sorry, is that not the episode involving Amity that you wanted me to talk about? Oh right, there was another important episode with her, wasn't there? Well then, let's quickly go over the night that every Owl House viewer will always remember, Grom Night. When the annual school dance includes fighting off a creature that personifies its opponent's worst fears, because of course it does, if I haven't made it clear by this point, this place is really messed up, Amity faces the fear of getting rejected by who she wanted to ask to Grom. The one person who has accepted her unconditionally. And having to stand up and face that fear made her secret wish come true.
May I have this dance?
Behold, the moment that officially put the Owl House on the map. That made headlines for what a revolutionary moment this was. This fabulous, beautifully animated magical dance sequence with a same-sex interracial pair. People lost their minds, and it is very easy to understand why. Now, in some respects, this isn't completely earth-shattering. There have been great strides made in the last 5 to 10 years or so for LGBT representation in animation. Toon Ruins did an amazing breakdown of that progress and the struggles that came with it that I highly recommend. So, what's so special about Luce and Amity? Well, not just the desire for a variety in depictions of LGBT relationships, and any way to tilt the scales slightly in the overwhelming amount of straight couples in family media is a good thing, but there's the very important distinction that this is a Disney animated series. Disney, whose non-coding LGBT representation has not had the best track record. A moment and clear direction for the relationships in this series from a wide-reaching company like Disney means so much to so many people. Looking back on this moment, it's kind of crazy how much this blew up. This didn't even confirm them as a couple, it just laid the groundwork for Luce and Amity to become something more. And I find it incredibly amusing how freaking blatant they got with Amity's feelings from this point on.
On a team with you? Running around and
cute uniforms. Sweating?
It is not possible to misinterpret that as simple friendship. There is no way to edit this to look less gay in international markets. It's hilarious. Where this lands on the representation scale will probably depend on where they go with this, especially when you consider the possibility that someday Luz is going to have to go home. But right now, the relationship between these two is so precious in how normalized it is. Luz and Amity are no different than any other adolescents in a kid's show working through their complicated feelings, and that's wonderful. It was a fantastic development that drew a lot more people to the show, and I'm very excited to see where they go with this romance in the future. All of this shows us just how much these characters evolve in just this first season. Willow becomes more confident in herself to the point that the other students start to see how talented she is, and Amity grows out of the need for status by bringing others down. Most of that growth is thanks to their time spent with Luz. Luz is able to see the amazing things in people where most don't. Willow's true power, Amity's kinder side, Ida's everything. She embodies acceptance and optimism in a world that, in some respect, finally appreciates it. Able to make real change in this world through her own contributions rather than any predetermined destiny. And there's something really pleasant in that. This dimension to what could have been disposable archetypes even extends to some of the secondary cast. Like Principal Bump, who I was just expecting to be another short-sighted antagonist, which, to be fair, is the impression you give off when you try to dissect someone to prove a point, but as the show goes on, he turns out to be a pretty open-minded and flexible guy when seeing the hidden potential and passion of his students. Or Amity's twin siblings, Edric and Amira, who could have just been skilled witches who cause trouble and make fun of their little sister like in their first appearance and be done with it. But the more they show up, the more they turn out to be pretty cool, inclusive, and even helpful when they want to be. Sure, they still give Amity a hard time and pull some questionable stunts, but they are more than that, and that's awesome. Am I forgetting any important characters?
Hello? Hooch! I'm on the floor! It's cold!
Nope, no, I don't think so. The Owl House goes the extra mile to show that there's more to a person than a few basic traits to serve a story. And in this show's case, it does serve the story of the series by making it all so much stronger. How being a weirdo can be lonely, but it's not as lonely as you would think if you find your people. In your own environment, it can be easy to feel like it's wrong to just be yourself, and that you have to comply with how others want you to live your life. But that's not how it has to be. Put yourself out there. Tell people when you see something special in them and how awesome that is. Take the steps to stand up for others and make the world around you the accepting one you'd want to live in rather than accepting things the way they are. Despite this being a world of magic, it takes a lot of work to make a change, but it can be done. One heart and mind at a time. Now that would probably be a good place to wrap up, but even if we're in the 2020s now, the Owl House continues a trend set by cartoons from the 2010s by having a continuing storyline with some mystery mixed in. I'm not going to get too specific here since I want to keep some of the bigger story spoilers under wraps, but I will lightly touch on some of the seeds planted from the mysteries in this season and possibly future ones. I said this when I talked about this show in my favorite entertainment of 2020 list a couple months ago, but whenever a show comes along with edgier humor, creepy environments, and an ongoing mystery, someone somewhere will label it as the next Gravity Falls. A label that I've never found to be particularly accurate, possibly because Gravity Falls is my favorite show. But out of the many, many shows I've seen bear this title in the last few years, the Owl House gets the closest to earning it, including with setting up its ongoing mysteries. The first major point of progression is in episode 4. It affects the relationships between the characters and their choices significantly. The last shot of the season is a mysterious portal, and going beyond the confines of the script, the first letter of the episode titles for season 1 spell out a secret message. A witch loses a true way. Looks like Dana Terrence picked up some cryptic tricks from Mr. Alex Hirsch. The arc for season 1 has a great sense of progression and suspense, which sparked a lot of discussion as the season aired, leading to the absolutely gripping 2-part season finale. Plus, the hints are already being laid out for where the story could be going next, utilizing the mythos around this world and how it's changed under the rule of this creepy masked man, Emperor Bellows. There have already been tons of theories floating around speculating about things like Bellows, or the Savage Times, or this creature whose corpse the Boiling Isle seems to consist of. After the events of the finale, there were a lot of shifts in the status quo that leaves the series in an interesting place going forward. Season 2 is likely going to be more exciting and creative than the first. Now if we could just get a release date, that'd be swell. For right now though, overall, The Owl House is a show wrapped in a familiar and welcoming premise, but when you peel back the layers, it challenges almost every convention that crosses its path and creates something innovative and loving in the process. The story and presentation are a proven crowd pleaser, but the avenues they take on the journey explore both the fun traditional tales and reinvent the scenarios this premise provides in very modern ways. The characters are very fleshed out with tons of personality and great evolving dynamics among them, brought to life through the show's stellar cast. The world is well realized both through its writing and the creative design work, especially the animation itself. I didn't really touch on this in the review, but there are some amazing animated sequences in this show. It's mind-blowing that this is season 1 animation. And this is just the beginning, laying the groundwork for the potential of a very compelling story going forward. You know, when the show was being promoted before it released, I was expecting to like it. But despite the innovative and progressive talent behind it, I somehow didn't predict how much this first season would shatter my expectations. The Owl House is weird and fun, nostalgic and groundbreaking, and I'm really excited to see where they go with all this come season 2. But in the meantime, it's time to reveal my... The Owl House managed to have a lot of standout episodes in its first season. There were a couple of meh episodes, but nothing I would consider bad just yet. So while there are some definite favorites in terms of the best episode so far, I could see getting a lot of different answers to this question. Mine, though, might not be an obvious choice, but I'm very fond of The Intruder. It just has such a great atmosphere to it. A dark and stormy night trapped inside the Owl House with a mysterious and potentially deadly creature. Like a lot of Owl House, it can sound kind of cliche, but it really works. You get to see the characters put through a stressful situation that can be genuinely tense to watch as they discover new things about themselves and each other that leads to deeper understanding among the group, and perhaps what this episode is most well known for, the reveal of Ida's secret. The reveal of Ida's curse, where she turns into this giant, horrifying looking owl beast if not treated properly, is the first real taste of the show's continuing storyline. There wasn't even really a hint of this show having a continuing storyline until this happened, but this is where the seeds for season 1's story were planted and would be the root of some of the most dramatic moments of the season. It definitely piqued my interest in the Owl House after this very memorable episode. Well, that's it for season 1. Once season 2 of the Owl House comes around, maybe we'll talk more about this show episodically. Let me know if that's something you guys would want. I mean, I gotta find something else to cover once I run out of DuckTales. Thanks for watching, everyone. Definitely let me know what you think of the show so far in the comments below. That's why this series is called Let's Talk About. I want to give a very special thanks to my patrons who help support my content, including David O'Sproul, Sebastian Canino of Cinemageddon Reviews, Chelsea Crandall, Hawk Hero, and Crowless. If you'd like to join these fine people in supporting my content while getting cool exclusive perks, you can check out my Patreon page at the link in the description, as well as my other social media if you'd like to follow me on any of those. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you guys next time.